Hi everyone, thank you for coming. So I thought I'd start with what Poppy Barley is. So Poppy Barley is your shoemaker for life. It's looking at how to do footwear differently and better by incorporating multiple measurements so you can get boots that actually fit you and then really beautiful, comfortable shoes. We also are completely transparent in how we manufacture, so you can go online, see the pictures of our studio, meet your makers, learn about their wages and their hours and their benefits. So that's really the difference of Poppy Barley. My personal story is that, growing up, like a lot of people, I wanted to be like either a fashion designer or an architect. So I had the interest in design, went and studied business. I finished business, went and worked for an architecture firm to explore that a little bit further. Ended up deciding to do international war studies as my master's program. So I moved to Belgium, studied that, worked for a while in conflict prevention for an international NGO, and then decided I really wanted to return to Alberta, where I was from. In Alberta, I spent 3 years working on the implementation of the 10-year plan to end homelessness and on affordable housing. And basically from that, I went to Bali. Was getting really closer to, for the first time in my life, wanting to start my own business. So as soon as I decided that, I think it changed my framework where I really started opening up and looking for ideas and looking for opportunity. So I went to Bali, I was shopping, had a pair of boots that I loved, they didn't come in my size. The man whipped out a measuring tape, made them for me, and I just thought, that's it. Like, I can take that and make it into a company, and by making it available online, make it available to everybody who doesn't travel to Bali or to Vietnam or to Poland, places where they're still making shoes like that. That was in February 2012. So my sister and I worked on Poppy Barley to get it to launch over about the next 6 months. We launched November 2012. So we've been in the marketplace for about a year and a half. So we're very, very young and learning a lot. What I thought I would cover today is basically that. So the reality of a creative business, some of the key steps I think to take to launching your business, when to quit your day job, I think it's an interesting discussion, how to grow quickly, fighting the dragon, and what being an entrepreneur is like. So I think this is just interesting. Most people here probably have a business or want to have a business that is inherently creative in that you're decorating or styling or designing. But I also think that all business is creative. And that's because you're trying to create something new in conditions of extreme uncertainty. As well as you probably really have scarce resources, and then that will make you be very creative compared to your competitors that you're trying to compete against, because they're probably a lot more established and they can do things differently, and you're like the scrappy underdog who's really relying on your creativity to get a foothold in the market. It's equally true that all creative businesses require a lot of non-creative work. So that is accounting, GST receipts, managing staff, pitching clients. There's so much administrative stuff. So I think it's worth, if you're considering it, going, what do you love? And what will you be happy if you have your own business? And I think one of the most amazing things about having your own business is the creative license that you suddenly get. You're not thinking of an idea and asking for permission. You're thinking of an idea and implementing it. And you get to work with, I think, highly motivated, creative people, and everybody can do the same thing. So that's awesome. On the other hand, there is a lot of non-creative work. And I think that it's true for everybody. You'll probably spend a minority of your time doing the design work. I am the designer for Poppy Barley. I probably spend 20% of my time designing footwear, and I spend the rest of my time doing everything else. So I think it's worth considering, what do you love? What are you willing to do? And if you really want to be the designer or don't have the head for the rest of this business, take on a partner or take on a founder or take on your first employee and have them take over more of that. But I think you might also love growing the business. And then you can be in the best of both worlds, where you love the creative and you love the design and you love the growing the business, because that's also inherently creative. I think for some steps to launching a company, I think the first thing to do is market analysis, product prototype, and I would add to that actually determining a business model. So basically, do you have a chance at having customers who will give you money for what your idea is the first part. Can you make the product? And then a business model is how will you make money? Once you move past that, I think there's some early strategic considerations that I'll walk through, and then launching with your minimum viable product. For market analysis, I think first is like, who's your competition? Does your great idea already exist? If so, that's fine, because competition can really validate the market, but how are you original or better? And that's not purely like, oh, well, I'm going to offer better customer service. Unless your competitor is like notorious for having awful customer service, something like that is very subjective to what you think about yourself. I mean, if you come out and you're really original, that's awesome. I think that those are the ideas that often take off the most, and then they're hard to copy. Like Nasty Gal, obviously super successful. You could copy her, but you're not going to have the authenticity that she does, and not going to have, I think, the same success level. Same with Warby Parker, companies like that. So if you're not kind of original and the trailblazer, totally fine, but then how are you better in a very concrete way? For example, in e-commerce, really like the first 3 rules are don't try to beat Amazon. Amazon will crush you. So that like maybe you have your own brand, or you sell something that Amazon doesn't sell, or you're selling local designers, or something like that. Once you kind of figure out viability, I think that secondary market research is helpful. That would be really, what's the size of the market? What are some of the trends, including the growth of the market? And who are the customer profiles? For that, what I found helpful is looking up HS codes. HS codes are for international trade. So they're very specific about like leather boots with uppers of leather, soles of leathers covering the ankle. And then that'll show you for every country like the total imports, as well as the countries in the world that are making that. So as you're sourcing for a manufacturer, you can also kind of hone in on what might be the most likely. I think talking to prospective customers is really important. I think the more simple your idea is, the easier it's going to be to get a true reaction from them. By that I mean, if I'm saying, I'm going to sell $30 cashmere t-shirts, probably most people are gonna be like, that would be amazing, because it's really easy to understand. Compared to that, you know, Apple coming up with the iPad, when it was a product that people didn't know they wanted and had never seen, that's going to be a lot harder to communicate. So I think that you don't always necessarily have to listen to the customer, but if you can, develop a prototype so that you can show them and then get feedback through showing. I was reading about Dropbox that I think it sold for like $1 billion or something anyways, and about how when he came up with his idea, everybody was like, they didn't care. And then he made a video that like showed his idea, and everybody realized it was awesome. So I think about how you can communicate your idea in a way that you can ideally get the most honest reactions to what you're thinking of creating possible. Total addressable market is, you know, in your first year, how many customers can you, like, I guess 2 things. One, how big is the actual market? So for us, it would be like, you know, at this price point, this product, what would be that market? And then addressable market would be, how many people of it do we think we can reach? And especially in your first years, to do bottom-up projections. So not like, oh, if we got 1% of the market, you know, we're gonna have $10 million and that's awesome. It's more like, okay, we can, through these channels, reach 30,000 customers our first year, and 1% of them will buy, and that will give us this number. Another thing as far as competition and market analysis is figuring out, are you a small business or are you a startup? Generally, the difference is how scalable is your opportunity. So with a small business, a classic example would be like a retail store in a city. Your addressable market is, say, the city of Edmonton. and maybe the communities that feed into the city of Edmonton. And in a way that's good because it shelters you from competition. So you're not competing against retail stores in Vancouver or retail stores in Toronto, but at the same time, the size of your market is Edmonton and area. If you're a startup, which is really everything online, everything's your competition because everybody can go in and Google like, you know, Citizens for Humanity size 27 jeans. But at the same point, everybody, like, well, you have more customer potential. So it's a more scalable opportunity. And then when you're talking to customers, I think enthusiasm is not commitment. And that really goes back to like, you know, the pork is committed to the breakfast and the chicken's enthusiastic with the pork and egg things. And I think a lot of people will be like, yeah, that's great. And then, but they're not your customer. Whenever we launch a product, well, when we do pre-launches and you can get sign up, you know, we'll get, I don't know, maybe 1%, 2% of the people who sign up come through and purchase. So really distinguishing, ideally you have like, it's better to start with a small group of people who like love what you're doing than a big group of people who are like, yeah, that's great. Because those people will become your customer and then you can improve your product so that you end up appealing to a larger group of people. So you actually really want to niche yourself in the beginning. It's also protection from competition. Early strategic considerations, so I'll just go through the next ones. I think as a company, what do you stand for? So that's really like your mantra or your meaning, or what are you trying to create? The second thing is who's your customer. I think it's definitely worth it, and this is something that Poppy Barley didn't do enough, so we're doing it more now. Really detailing out like so much information about who he or she is. So some of it's purely demographic, some of it's, you know, personality and interest and style. Other brands, how to reach her. So what does she read? What does she follow? Who does she listen to? Who are her influencers? And the reason why this is really helpful, primarily, one is because it'll serve as a filter for your marketing efforts. So when you're going, okay, how should I market on my limited budget? It will be, okay, well, how would I reach, I don't know, Patricia, my 40-year-old housewife who lives in the country, and it'll really help you narrow down what's actually the best opportunities for reaching Patricia. And then the second thing is from a business development perspective, which is a great way to grow your company, is going, okay, what other brands have my customer? And how can I partner with those brands so that I'm giving my product exposure to their customers because we have the same customer. Distribution, I think about it right away because it'll really determine the steps that you take to launching your company. I think there's really basically, at least for a product business, two big choices. If you're doing online or if you're doing retail or if you're doing both. So online, it'll change how you price and mark up your product. You'll build a website, you'll have to figure out how to ship individually to customers, and then you'll also have to acquire every single one of your own customers. With retail, the margins change, so you'll have to assume that your retailers will need 100% margin, so work back on that from your pricing. Marketing yourself will be probably more to retailers than directly to customers. And then your logistics will change because you'll be doing more bulk shipping to a store or to a warehouse as opposed to directly to customers. A lot of brands do both, obviously, because then I think the advantage of retail is that it can help you grow faster because instead of building every single customer, you're getting into the customers of your retailers. But then the advantage of online is that two things. One, you probably have better margins because you don't have the retailer in there. And then secondly is that you own your customers, and owning your customers is super valuable. And by that, I just mean you know who they are. So if you sell your clothes to a store and then they sell them to the customer, you have no direct connection with your customer. So you can't you don't control your destiny as much. And I would also say that other companies acquire companies for two reasons. One is the revenue made from margins, and the second is the customers that they have. I think even if you're doing retail, you should have a website because everybody will still try to find you online. So we all know what those look like, have product photos, editorial photos, and then a directory of where they can shop for your product. Core team is like, what are the core businesses of your company? Do you have them within your founding team? And if not, build out your team. So for Poppy Barley, that would be, for us, Kendall and I, when we started it, we were like, okay, we're not the best at this, but we can start to do a lot of the marketing and the development. But it was, we don't know how to make shoes. We don't know how to make shoes, and we have no experience in the footwear industry. And for us, before we, unless we have a product, we have nothing. So for us, it was actually building out our team to find a manufacturer to give us a product, was our first step. So this is Poppy Barley today, but we have one more person who's new, so I haven't added her quite yet. So that's Kendall and I who started the company. The first two people we found were Laura and Lupita. So Laura is our broker. We actually found her. We decided to fly to Mexico for a week to do factory visits in this one city that looked really promising. We connected with the local embassy for translators. Through that, we got Laura's contact, and Laura works as a broker. So basically that means that she helps brands find factories, she does quality control, she does shipping, she does material sourcing, etc. So she's on the ground for us in Mexico and directly employed by us. With Laura, we found Lupita, and Lupita is the manager of a small custom footwear studio. So we've been working with her from the beginning. After that, for us, it was really, okay, we need a brand and we need a website. So that brought in Monica, who started with developing our logo and our brand book for us. And then we also met Dalen, who's there at the back. And he built our first website. Both of them were contractors. This was pre-launch. We didn't have the money or the confidence to take on employees, so we contracted them to get us to launch. After that, we added Caroline, November, December, so pretty soon right after we launched. And she was a she is a community manager. So her role is really to engage on social media, create great content, and help us with outreach. And then as we got busier, we added Brianne, who's a customer care person. And then again, as we got bigger, we now have everybody on staff. So they've all gone from contractors to employees. The last consideration I think is important is just what type of life do you want to have? And spending some time thinking about this. You don't want to start a business and then hate your life. So how much do you want to work? Do you want to spend a month at July at the cabin? Or and I think lifestyle businesses get maybe a bad rap. But do you want a lifestyle business? But I think it's also there's this huge continuum of you're gonna work like a dog to a lifestyle business, and what would really make you happy and what would suit, your marriage and your family and all of those other things. How much are you willing to risk? I think risk is very individual, risk is very personal, so that's a question to ask yourself. What will make you happy? Do you want the responsibility of employees? On one hand, to get big, you need them. On the other hand, it is a lot of responsibility. And it does limit some of the, I'm going to work from Kelowna for a month kind of idea. So after you have kind of those things figured out, so you know that there's a market and you have a product prototype and you have a business model and you've thought through basically some of the key considerations, I would really go into building out your minimum viable product. Minimum viable product is a concept from technology, which is basically what's the minimum that you need to get into the market to see if you have customers. So basically, instead of with Poppy Barley, for example, we started with a really basic website and 3 boot styles and 3 leather colors. And it was one last development. So instead of going, okay, we're going to start with 20 styles because we need choice for our customers, no, we're going to have 3 because it's going to limit 2 reasons, really. It's going to limit our risk by basically making it less expensive to get into the market. And then second, nothing will compare with the learning that you get from being in the marketplace. So you might as well, I think, start small and then spend so much time in your first year analyzing and listening, and then build what people are asking for, as opposed to building what you think that they want in like a big ship kind of way. This was our launch budget. So it was about 30 grand for us to get into the marketplace. You can see, product development, travel, website and website design, incorporating brand development, and then smaller cost, which now that I think about it would include editorial and product photography. So I feel like for most businesses, 20 to 50 or even less. Okay, choosing your name. Now that I think it's something that we did wrong at the start, and I think it's something that happens a lot. So I think the first thing is generating ideas based on your brand positioning and your brand story. So, for example, the holy grail of internet companies mostly is a 4-letter name with verb potential. So, I'm going to Google that, I'm going to Uber that, I'm going to whatever. By contrast, I think if you want to really position yourself as like high-end or different, you can go a lot more exotic, a lot more complicated, maybe complicated on purpose. I think some other considerations that are super important: spell it properly and sound different. Most of your customers will hear about you somewhere, and then what you're really hoping they do is they actually look you up. So they're going to find you via search. If you don't spell your name properly, people are going to not be able to find you. And if you sound like 10 other companies, or you're using a word that's used over and over and over, you will not come up in search. And most customers will abandon it as opposed to like go through and try to find you. This is especially important in the beginning when you're going to show up low on search anyways, right? Because you don't have an audience. So I would say, sound different. Don't use lowercase letters. Once you start to write out your company name in paragraphs, it makes it really confusing. And I think avoid anything overly trendy. Something that I read that I thought was a good idea was, generate your names, send them to some prospective customers, ask them to say their favorites, and then, have the survey flip to a next page and ask them to recite back to you what the options were. And that will give you a really good sense of what do they actually remember. Because again, you're going to get like 30 seconds of somebody's attention, and you want them to be able to remember you, and you want them to be able to find you. Once you have a name, I think what happens a lot is you're like, great, we're going to be this, we're going to go develop a logo. So don't do that. First, do a nuance search. A nuance search will tell you if you can have that name. So a nuance search will show you any registered incorporations, any registered trademarks. So your name has to be distinct. So, for example, with Poppy Barley, we wanted, in the start, we were going to be Astrid Boots. When we nuance searched it, after we started to develop the logo, we found out that's not a viable name because it's not distinct enough. You can choose to do a provincial or a national search, and then you can choose to incorporate provincially or nationally. If you incorporate provincially, you have protection, for example, in Alberta. If you incorporate nationally, you have protection across Canada. I think as far as deciding what you want goes back to like, are you a small business or are you a startup? What's your opportunity? Is your domain available? Obviously just look it up. And then there's this great tool that will give you for every social media if your name is available. So if you could secure the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram account. So that's really important. So once you figure that out, I would buy your domain, secure your social media channels. We incorporated, if you're like a one-man show, you may or may not have to incorporate. You don't have to, but incorporating gives you some level of protection on your name. And if you're taking anybody else's money outside, which is the main reason we did, then you really have to. Obviously, trademarking is the ultimate in protection. We didn't do it because I think that to spend, $3 grand to trademark your name before you know if you have a single customer, it's kind of, you can, but it's not necessary. So that was our decision. And then at that point, start developing your logo and your brand. So as I mentioned, we started with a different name. We were Astrid Boots, found out it wasn't distinctive enough, So it brought us back to the drawing board, and we started to research the history of shoemaking, and we found out that in 13th century England, feet were actually measured in barley corns, and poppy seeds were the smaller unit to measurement. So we thought, so the two names we kind of came up with, one was Poppy Barley for that reason, and then the other one was Cordovan, which means luxury footwear maker. We looked at both. Poppy Barley obviously doesn't really mean anything. It's something we made up, so it was a lot more available, and it was easier for people to remember. So that's why we went with Poppy Barley. So building out your website. I think don't waste your money. I think that it should cost you anywhere from $0 to $5,000, like max, for your minimum website. For us, we didn't have any experience in the tech world, so this is how we actually got connected to Startup Edmonton and got really good advice from them, where we put together an RFP for our initial website, and we initially were getting quotes anywhere back from like $15,000 to $41,000, and we ended up paying $5,000, including the design. By going to people who knew great developers like Dalen. And then Dalen knew that we actually needed something really basic and functional to start, so we were able to get into the marketplace at a much lower price point. For us, we couldn't use something like Shopify because we had to interrupt the shopping cart in order to add our measurement pages. But if you're selling a typical product, there's so many, like Shopify is a great one to use, where some people can do it entirely themselves. Other people will spend, a couple grand to personalize your Shopify website. But this is really, a lot of companies are making this much easier. I think from an essential website standpoint, make sure you have a shopping cart. Actually, we'll start here. So make sure you can do everything yourself. That's really core. You can add a product, you can do a blog post, you can change your homepage slider. If you're outsourcing that to a web dev team, it's going to freeze your business by, you're going to have to wait for them, and it's going to be expensive, so it won't give you the flexibility that you need. Anything like Shopify is built so that you can do it easily. I would also include a shopping cart and a payment merchant, so that the difference is, some websites you can't actually buy directly on the website, you need to email the person, and if you have a shopping cart, you can go through the checkout process. I would do that just because it's no harder, and it's a more frictionless buying experience. So instead of responding to emails, and maybe when you send the invoice, the customer is no longer interested, they can just take care of it themselves. Payment merchant is just, how are you going to take payment? And then I think it's worth investing in Google Analytics setup. So that would be part of what I would ask the developer I hire to do. Google Analytics will tell you, like, how many website visitors do you have? Where are they coming from? What sales do you have? What is the geography of your visitors? It'll give you so much information. And then a funnel is going through, if you look at, you're trying to get customers to come to your site, and then you're trying to get them to land on your product page, and then you're trying to get them to go to the checkout page. By marking your funnel, you're going, okay, where are we losing people through from, coming to the website to purchasing? And you might realize, oh, we're losing everybody on the checkout page because the province dropdown is broken. And that's why our sales plummeted last week. So it'll really help you figure out what you need to work on. Other great tools from a website perspective, not necessary when you start. Crazy Egg, you can implant Crazy Egg on your website pages, and it'll heat map where customers are going. So for example, if you have this amazing page and nobody's visiting it, you will figure that out. User testing is you'll give them an assignment, like pick out a red shoe and purchase it. And you can watch them go through your website, and they'll provide feedback. So you'll learn essentially, is it clear? Can the average person online figure out your website? Google Webmaster Tools like Google Trends, you can go, okay, how many searches is there for cognac boots? Where are they coming from? What times of year are they coming from? Things like that. Optimizely lets you do A/B testing without a developer. So what that means is if you're trying to go, okay, what if I had a $400 boot versus a $300 boot? What would be the best model? I might sell less of the $400 boots, but I'd make more money versus the $300 boots. So I'm going to test that by creating 2 pages and splitting down my website traffic. So directing half the traffic to one page and half the traffic to the other page, with the only difference being the price point. So Optimizely lets you do that as a non-developer. MailChimp for email marketing, SurveyMonkey for surveying, and Desk.com if you want FAQs with search functionality. So your customers can go like, how do I order online? And get the knowledge article. Margins and pricing. I mean, the first consideration is like retail versus direct, so retail versus online. After that, anywhere from like 30% to 100% plus. I would only do something as low as 30% if you're like, you know, the Walmart or the Zulily of the internet, where it's all about like really high volume deals, like price competition, and you have no product development. So considerations, brand positioning, obviously something that's more aspirational, doesn't necessarily want to be cheap because the price point is part of what makes it aspirational. How high touch is your company? So, you know, do you have to guide the customer through what you're purchasing, or are they really self-sufficient? That will determine how much you have to staff, so it'll help determine how much money you should be making per sale. Product development costs, are you going to raise investor money or grow and survive on sales? So some companies purposely make no money in order to get big. Obviously Amazon does that, Bonobos does that, they make 5%. And they've been in the marketplace for 5 years and they make 5% because their plan is to dominate the market. You can only do that if you are regularly fundraising to bring in outside money to give you the money to not die as a company. But it's worth, I don't know, considering. What are your economies of scale? So obviously that normally happens a lot as you increase your volume. A lot of things will get cheaper for you. So we have met some businesses who went from the start, I priced myself, you know, as though 2 years from now I could do this volume and then I could survive for the first year or two without making money, knowing that I would end up, you know, I could grow faster and then I'd end up making money. Again, a lot of people can't survive on that, but I think it's worth it's interesting. Product mix would be, you know, do you make 10% on your belts but 70% on your handbags? If so, you can have some lower priced items, you know, that help draw people in, but then you make your money elsewhere. I think one thing to consider is if you're currently making your product, but you intend to, you know, outsource the making of your product once you have the orders to do so, I would price my product at what the outsourced price would be, as opposed to like my time is $40 an hour and it takes me 3 hours to make this skirt. Generally, you're better to start higher with prices and then lower them, you know, then go the other way around. And I think there are economies of scale, but you also, it could be the converse where things could increase in price. I think with pricing, super important, do not forget the cost of customer acquisition. This is your marketing budget per customer to acquire them. What percent of your product you will sell on sale and the average discount. The cost of returns. So figure out the average for your industry, and I would just, you know, assume that you are going to be the same. And then the cost of your time, so that you're making sure that you pay yourself. The cost of customer acquisition is a really tricky one because you don't know when you launch. And it's actually one of the killer of companies is that maybe you're profitable if you look at your direct costs and then your price, but if it's costing you $100 to acquire a customer and then you're making on average $56 per customer, in the end you will go to business for that reason. So it's kind of one of the fun things of first year e-commerce is figuring out as best you can what is your cost of customer acquisition to really figure out if you have a viable business. With healthy e-commerce companies, generally they're looking at the lifetime value of a customer, which is how much you can make on a customer over their lifetime, is 5 to 8 times the cost that you spent to acquire that customer. So for that, part of it's margins, but the biggest thing is repeat customers. So ideally, you know, they love your product, they love your customer service, and you are getting customers for life. And if you can do that, that is one of the best signs of your company. I think that's it. So I read a study about Starbucks. Starbucks has an average lifetime value of $11,000 per customer, which is awesome. That's why Starbucks has so much money. Because, most people buy 5 coffees a day, $2 a coffee, maybe they have like 70% margins. So this is, kind of a graph showing some of the analysis that you'll spend time on. Okay, so that's kind of like MVP. I didn't touch on everything because I just didn't have time. And I'm definitely open to questions after, but when to quit your day job. So I think this is interesting, and I think it's, what's your risk level? And I think risk level, it's very personal, and part of it is just like, how risky do you think it is? Some people are more optimistic than others, other people are more risk adverse. So part of it's personal. Part of it is situational. If you are, a 20-year-old college student in your dorm room, your risk level is very low because you don't have a job anyways. You can go back to school at any time. Are you living at home? You have no costs, you have no dependents. So I think that's why it's so easy for a lot of young people, to start companies. Compared to that, if you're 40 years old, you have a great salary, a great position, you have 2 children, maybe a stay-at-home spouse, your risk level is going to be very different. So I don't think anybody should be like, oh my God, this is my idea, and quit your job. I think you should start going through the steps of determining, like the early strategic considerations, start working on getting into the marketplace, maybe get into the marketplace depending on how much work and if it's possible to do. And then at some point, you will have to decide, I'm going to leap into this. So, this is your risk level, which will hit somewhere, and then take your confidence level by going through the right steps to determine the viability of your business, and then also minimizing the risk through launching with your minimum viable product. And then at some point, I think it'll never, ever, ever happen that you'll be like, I am 100% confident that this will work, so I'm going to quit my job. I think there's still going to have to be a big leap of faith, and I think most entrepreneurs spend the first year to 2 years, maybe longer, of their business. There's never a guarantee. Like I feel when I started Poppy Barley, probably about a year in, I was like, I think this will work. And that's your first year. How to grow quickly. I think part of growth, if your opportunity is bigger, that will help. Creating something awesome will help a lot. Raising outside money. We did this at Poppy Barley. There's pros and cons for sure, but it helps you go from like 2 people to 4 people, and then 4 people gives you so much more. You can get so much more done that you can grow faster. At the same time, you're giving up some equity, you're giving up some control, and I think you also put more pressure on yourself because you're not only now disappointing yourself, but you're disappointing the people who believed in you to give you money. But it is a way to grow. And then I think super important is figuring out your growth engine. So that is, how do you acquire customers? And then once you figure that out, you can do it more to acquire more customers. Typically, the things to look for is to take a marketing lab approach. So, all the ways that you can try to get a customer. Run them in small experiments, like maybe direct mail, or online advertising, or blogger collaborations, or etc. And really, what's important is that you evaluate the results of every little experiment that you do. So what would be important is, what is your cost for an online business? What is your cost of visitors? So you paid like 50 cents through direct mail to get a visitor to your website. How did they convert? Or what's your cost of lead acquisition? So that would be any new subscribers, Facebook fans, Instagram fans, anybody who's really going to then follow your company and potentially purchase later. And then what's your cost of conversions, or your actual customer acquisition cost? So that's your cost per sale. And then ideally, and this is a bit more complicated, but then ideally you track those customers in cohorts over time, and you figure out who your best customers are, and you try to get more customers like that. So for example, it could be that one group actually has higher initial sales, but another group, if you look at their lifetime value over time, is your most profitable customer. And that's who you want. I found out just the other day that Canada Post offers an interesting service called where you can give them the postal codes of your customers and they will analyze them for you to give you the demographics of your customers and the psychographics. So demographics would be, this is the age, this is where they live, this is their income, this is, you know, all of that basic information. Psychographics is a lot more like, this is what they believe, this is their hobbies, these are their interests. So that's a really interesting service that I think, you know, you're going to start thinking, this is who my customer is, and at some point you can actually see, like, is that truly my customer, or am I getting this customer? So, and I mean, I think most companies definitely aren't averse to taking money from a different type of customer because maybe you got it wrong, right? And that's fine. Fighting the dragon. So I think fighting the dragon is taking on the major problems with a S that your company is facing. Fighting the dragon requires two things. I think one, proper analysis. So for example, if you don't have Google Analytics set up or a funnel set up, you might know that sales are low, but you don't know, is it because I'm not driving enough traffic to my website? Is it because I'm not converting them at a high enough rate? Is it because nobody's buying again, which is a bad sign? So part of fighting the dragon is isolating the problem that you are having through proper analysis. I think the second part of fighting the dragon is really to be courageous. And I say courageous because I think that there's always so much work in a new company that you can work super hard and pat yourself on the back and feel that you're doing a great job. But fighting the dragon is like the hard, uncomfortable work, and you can avoid it and still feel like justified in what you're doing. But if you're not taking on the dragon will kill you. So I think it's a really important question to always have in your mind, like, what is my dragon? And sometimes the dragon has more than one head, and then hopefully, you know, you're lopping off the heads and going for it. Being an entrepreneur. This is my favorite quote. Yeah. This is my favorite quote about it. So it's like, holy shit, look at her, she's riding a lion. And then you're like, holy shit, I'm riding a lion. So, you know, like, how do I stay on the lion? So, yeah. I feel to break that down into more, I think the bad side is that, you know, it'll be very consuming. I think it's like having a baby where it like takes over your life, and then hopefully as the child grows up, it becomes more manageable. It's super stressful. It'll probably make you poor in the start. You can never leave your work and everything is your problem. So if you're on vacation, your work is still important. If somebody you work for screws up or your factory doesn't deliver, it is your problem. You will have, this one isn't necessarily good or bad, but you definitely get an elevated profile, and then you have fans and you have critics, and that's just the way of the world. I think on the good side, it's a super interesting experience, you know, this baptism through fire. As I mentioned, the unparalleled creative license that you will gain to do what you want to do, which is amazing. My favorite is actually that I think if you believe in wanting your life to be a journey of personal discovery and growth, it's amazing for that. Also, you will connect with a whole new group of people, entrepreneurs that are smart and passionate and really love talking to each other because it's a totally different world and a totally different mindset. So for me, most of my new friends and connections in the past 2 years have been in this group of entrepreneurs. And then obviously there's the chance that you can end up very successful. To close, some good reads. I think the best book for when you're starting, and I have it here, is The Art of the Start. The Lean Startup is really good for evaluating in the early days. It kind of takes that marketing lab approach and walks you through it in more steps so that you can really figure out what to do to grow your business. And then honestly, if you're the boss and times are really tough, The Hard Things About Hard Things is awesome. It's by Ben Horowitz. And it's one of the few books that addresses the CEO about the hardest things that you have to do as the leader of your company. There's also, there's so many blogs. This one's really funny. Once you start your own company, they're running a startup Tumblr. I think for this room and for me, I also really love the business of fashion site. It's very interesting. Yeah, so that is my contact information. And I think, I don't know. Anyways, I don't know how much time I have, but I can take questions now. If anybody hasn't one.